In an effort to provide alternatives to the butter-only diet that I so enjoy in the backcountry, I want to introduce you to pemmican. Pemmican is the original survival food. It was made by a lot of different Native American tribes. The word pemmican comes from the Cree word pemmi, which means fat. So it's all natural, super easy to make, it'll store indefinitely, you don't have to refrigerate it, and it is super nutritious for you. So with that said, let's make some pemmican.
My name is Laura Zara.
The most important thing is not dying.
I'm a survival and backcountry specialist.
It is so cozy. It doesn't taste great, but it'll cure all your problems.
I have a hard time explaining what I do and what my life looks like,
but it's way easier to just show you.
In grizzly country, I tend to up the plus on that, learn what it takes to become decivilized.
To make pemmican, you only need 2 ingredients, fat and meat. If you're feeling fancy, you can also add berries. The meat and the berries, you want to dry out extensively. The fat, you need to render. So we're going to start with the fat. I'm going to be using regenerative pastures beef suet. You can use either pork or beef or wild game fat. The problem with pork, which you make lard out of, is that it doesn't store as long. Beef is better, and grass-fed is way better than regular. Grass-fed beef contains a lot of conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA. It's been shown in research to be really great at potentially preventing heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So that's a win. So there's a few different ways you can render your fat. You can either do it on the stove top, which is pretty time intensive. You really have to watch it and stir it quite a bit. You can also do it in the oven, or you can do it in a slow cooker, which is my favorite method because you don't have to have the oven on all day. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. You want to cut your fat into the smallest pieces possible. You want to look at it and make sure there's not any chunks of meat on it. You want it to be just the fat, and cut any residual pieces of meat off. If your fat is still a little frozen, it can be easier to cut, but use what you got. So you want to put a little bit of water in there. That's gonna eventually evaporate off, but as your fat is heating up before it starts to melt, it'll prevent the bottom layer from getting burned. I'm gonna turn it on to high for about 20 to 30 minutes with the lid on, and then I'm gonna come back to it and check and see how it's doing. So for your meat, you ideally don't want a cut that has a lot of fat marbled in it because you want to try to cut all the fat out. It's way easier to cut if you stick it in the freezer for a little bit before you cut it. You don't want it totally frozen, but if it's slightly frozen, it kind of makes it stiffer, easier to cut. I didn't do that because I wanted to have a challenge. That's a total lie, I just forgot. But if you do stick it in the freezer for a little bit, it's gonna make it way easier to cut your really thin slices, which is what you need to do. You wanna cut as thin of slices as you can because these need to be completely dried out. It's not the jerky that is soft and pliable, it is like chips. They are completely dry, all the moisture is gonna be gone. It doesn't matter if you have really big pieces of jerky or small ones, because ultimately all you need to do is have them dry. You take your thin strips and you put them on your dehydrator tray. It's really good with any kind of game meat because they tend to be a little bit more lean, or you can use beef, a leaner cut. Just make sure that you're cutting the fat off, and if you are using meat, grass-fed is gonna be way better, way more nutrients in it. Traditionally, around here in Montana, service berries were used in pemmican, so I went out and harvested some wild service berries.
Mostly service berries down here, and you can really find quite a lot of them in one spot. Just make sure that you don't run into a bear. These have all been kind of ravaged already by bears, but they leave a lot behind.
I dehydrated the service berries in my dehydrator. You want to be around 135 degrees. I also tried drying some just out in the sun, and that worked awesome too. So either or, you can also use an oven, but you really don't want to get above 135 degrees. So the ovens go that low. I don't cook a lot. Traditionally, they were also ground with stones. Whoever did this with stones at any point in time, yeah, it's a lot of work. I'm gonna use my CarbonTV coffee grinder. This is way easier. And there is my berry powder. Traditionally, the meat was cut into thin strips and then dried over a fire that was kind of smoky and low, just a bunch of coals, or just dried out in the sun. But being able to have an oven and a dehydrator, whatever, makes things way easier. You want your dehydrator to be about 170 to 180 for at least 4 hours, but you're just gonna keep checking it until it's rock hard. Starting to hear a little bit of a sizzle, so I'm gonna mix this a little bit. You can see the fat's already starting to melt on the bottom, but it's not burning, so I'm just gonna keep it on high for a little bit longer. The lid on keeps the fat heating, it makes the fat heat up quicker, but once it gets to the right temperature, I'm gonna take the lid off so all that water can evaporate. So once your meat is hard, just gonna break apart, it's totally dried, it's ready to grind up. So the way it is traditionally done was using rocks. I have this mortar and pestle. Yeah, I'm gonna use a food processor. Kind of annoying to get it all to be the right consistency, so we're gonna see what happens when I do this. My food processor has a hard time getting everything into dust, so I put it in a jar and I shake it, and then all the bigger chunks rise to the top where I can scoop them off to put back in the processor. I want to be left with mostly just powder. There's a few little chunks in there, not a huge deal, but you want to try to have it be mostly this powder so that it lasts as long as it possibly can. Even though when I make pemmican, it doesn't last that long because I eat it. You want to be aware that if you're looking to get a pound of jerky, you're going to have to do a lot more than a pound of meat in the dehydrator. So it shrinks a lot. I put this cut of elk meat in the dehydrator. It originally weighed 628 grams or 1.385 pounds. And then it shrunk down to 166 grams or 0.336 pounds. You do the math, it's definitely one of those things that you need a lot more than you think to get a lot. Just want to keep stirring that fat, and you can see it's already rendering there in the bottom. This is all kind of starting to bubble and melt, so I'm gonna turn it down to the low setting, and I'm gonna leave the lid off so that it can start really evaporating. I don't want any moisture left in there, so. When all the fat starts to darken, you can strain it, and then you're gonna put the chunks back on the heat. The liquid that you've removed from the chunks of fat, you can strain it or run it through a cheesecloth. So I like to run it through a metal strainer and then put it through a cheesecloth just to make sure all the chunks are out. As you continue to heat the remaining fat, you're just gonna repeat that process. You wanna watch and make sure that you're not burning your chunks of fat, but keep draining off and straining that tallow, and pretty soon you're gonna end up with a jar of liquid goodness. You want about 1-to-1 ratio for your powder to your fat. So I have about 45 grams of my berry powder, about 255 grams of my meat powder, so I'm adding 300 grams of my fat. You don't have to be as exact as I am, about 1-to-1, but you have to realize that the volume is not necessarily gonna be the same. Your fat is gonna be heavier than your powder, so I don't know, if you got a scale, use it. The next step is to heat up your fat. So I use a double boiler where I just heat this water. I put a towel on the bottom of it so there's not direct heat into the fat. I'm gonna heat it up until it's super runny and has less viscosity. That's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna pour in my berries and my meat. And I'm gonna pour in my heated fat. All right, well, that's looking extremely saturated. I didn't use all my fat, but that's looking good. And I'm just stirring it until it's all mixed in really well. And right now it looks disgusting. They look like taco salad bowls, but I'm gonna wrap them with butcher paper with the shiny side up. You can also use parchment paper. It's pretty hot in here today and these are still hot, so I'm gonna put them in the fridge to cool them down. My fun-shaped pemmican patties are ready to go. For storage, the main things are keeping them dry and in a dark spot where it's a consistent temperature, relatively cool. Moisture is the biggest problem. If this gets wet, then it can rot. That's why we took the moisture out of the berries and the meat and replaced it with fat. You don't want moisture. Moisture is bacteria. Bacteria is spoilage. I like to wrap it in butcher paper. You can put it in a Ziploc bag. I have little bite-sized pieces I wrap up. Serving-sized pieces, not bite-sized pieces. It's amazing. Wow. The texture is kind of grainy, but the fat is like melting in my mouth right now. And I don't know, it doesn't necessarily taste like meat because there's so much fat in it until you give it a second. It's really good. It almost tastes like buttered meat. If you want to spice it up literally with spices, you can. I really like fat, so I like to put a lot in my pemmican. But if you don't like as much fat, the most important thing is to make sure that all of your dried powder is coated with fat. So you can kind of eyeball it to make sure, and you don't necessarily need to make it as soupy and runny as I like mine. The one thing to be aware of for storage is taking note of whatever fat you used and what the consistency of that fat is at room temperature. So if you have pemmican and you're using a fat that turns it into liquid at room temperature, when you take it out of your freezer and go into the field, it's potentially going to melt and get all over your stuff. So be aware, know to keep it at the right temperature limit so that it stays the consistency you want, and just realize that if it gets up to a certain heating point, that fat can melt and then it'll turn back into that goop again. So keep it at the temperature. If you're taking it out in spring or fall, like I like to do when I'm hunting or antler hunting, then it is gonna have no problem maintaining the same form. If it does melt, it's just gonna be a different consistency. Put it in a plastic bag so it doesn't get all over your stuff. It's not gonna go bad, which is the really nice thing about it. Pemmican can last decades if it's stored properly. I love taking it with me because you get a lot of bang for your buck. In this tiny little package, there are a lot of calories and nutrients, so it's a little energy bar that you can make right at home. Almost as good as butter. Cut into thin strip. Wow. Thing. Oh, I didn't plug it in. Come on, suction cups. And proceed to get your fat everywhere.